She asked the cowboy for work, and he said, "Only if you'll marry me before sunset." New Mexico, summer of 1886. Dusk bled across the horizon, and the desert wind drove a veil of dust down the road. A coyote's cry cut the silence as Clara Jenkins approached the gates of the Red Mesquite Ranch. Her worn suitcase felt heavier with every step, though she carried little more than a dress, a Bible, and the last coins left to her name. She halted before the iron gate, her breath sharp from the long walk. From the porch, a tall man watched, broad-shouldered, weathered by sun and silence. His hand rested near the revolver on his hip. He did not move until her eyes met his. "No work here," he said flatly, his voice as dry as the dust at their feet. Then, after a long pause, he added with startling finality, "Unless you marry me before sunset." Samuel Harper was a man shaped more by silence than by words. Folks in Lincoln County said he had the look of one who had buried too many things. Dreams, kin, even pieces of himself, and then walled up the graves with stone. When Clara first laid eyes on him, standing on that porch with the setting sun at his back, she could not have known how much of him was already dead. Years before, Sam had been a boy like any other in Missouri, full of reckless laughter, breaking horses with his older brother Elias, helping their father mend fences that could never keep out debt or drought. When war came, Elias marched south with the gray, while Sam, stubborn, idealistic, chose the blue. That split was the first wound, the one that never healed. Sam's regiment fought in Tennessee and later in Virginia. He carried a rifle through mud and smoke until the lines blurred between faces of friend and foe. He killed because others charged him, because orders barked it, because survival left no room for doubt. And when surrender finally came, he returned home with a medal he never asked for and hands that trembled when they weren't gripping a tool. Elias never came back at all. The letter arrived first, "Missing in action." Months later came rumor. Elias had been shot in the back near Shiloh. Some whispered it was his own men, desertion punished in blood. Others swore Sam himself had been seen on that field. The story spread like wildfire. Sam Harper had killed his brother. Whether true or not, the shadow clung to him heavier than his saddle. Sam left Missouri. He drove cattle west, laid rail for a season, drifted until New Mexico seemed empty enough to hold a man who wished to forget. On the edge of the Rio Hondo Valley he staked his claim, land tough and stony, but his. He named it Red Mesquite after the stubborn trees that grew no matter how often the wind tore them. He built a house with his own hands, though it was more fortress than home. He kept men around him for work, a foreman, a cook, a pair of vaqueros, but none close enough to call friend. Neighbors tried at first. A rancher named Doyle once brought over whiskey, saying men ought to share company in such lonely country. Sam drank a single glass, then never spoke to Doyle again. When a schoolteacher rode out, asking for a donation for the town, Sam gave her money but no smile. They called him cold, godless, bitter. Perhaps all of it was true. Some whispered darker things. They said Sam had dealings with Apaches, that he sold rifles and powder in exchange for safe passage across their hunting grounds. Others swore he'd hidden gold stolen from a payroll wagon burned out near Roswell years before. The law never proved a thing, but rumors grew like thorns, hard to tear away once they took root. Sam lived as though it didn't matter. He rose before dawn, drove himself into work until sweat stung his eyes and blisters tore his palms. At night he sat alone on the porch, revolver near at hand, listening to the coyotes call across the plains. Loneliness gnawed, but he wore it like armor. Better silence than betrayal. Better solitude than another grave to dig. Still, sometimes the mask slipped. On Sundays he rode into town, always alone, always armed. Once, a boy no more than 10 stared at him wide-eyed and asked, "Mister, did you really kill your brother?" The mother dragged the boy away before Sam could answer. But that night he sat awake till dawn, staring at the ceiling, remembering Elias's face in the Tennessee mud. Sam had no family, no wife, no children. He never courted anyone, though women in town sometimes looked his way, half out of curiosity, half out of fear. He was tall, broad, with a face carved by wind and sun, but his eyes, they carried winter in them, and most looked away quick enough. For years, this life of stone suited him. He did not ask for change. He did not believe in redemption, or even in tomorrow. He simply endured, one season into the next, until the valley itself seemed to recognize him as one more scar across its barren surface. Yet beneath the cold exterior, something fragile remained, though Sam would have denied it with his last breath. In the barn loft, folded into a Bible never opened, he kept a photograph, a daguerreotype of his parents and Elias before the war. Sometimes, after whiskey dulled the edge of memory, he would take it out, staring at Elias's youthful grin, wondering if the stories whispered in town were true. Did he kill his brother? Or was it only guilt heavy as stone that had convinced him he must have? By 1886, Sam Harper had been alone nearly 15 years. The men on his payroll respected him but did not love him. The sheriff dealt with him because he had to. Even the preacher once said from the pulpit that Harper was a man who lives in shadows and does not trust the light. Sam, hearing this, only grunted and left. When Clara Jenkins appeared at his gate that summer evening, suitcase in hand, Sam was not looking for a wife. He was not looking for salvation. He believed himself beyond such things. What he sought, though he would never have admitted it, was a shield. A woman at his side, bound by law and name, might quiet the rumors, might give Barton and the others less excuse to pry. Marriage was not romance to him. It was defense. A wall of paper and rings to keep the world at bay. And yet, when he looked at Clara standing in the dust, weary and alone, he felt something stir, something he thought long buried. Perhaps it was only pity, perhaps a flicker of recognition. For her eyes carried the same emptiness he saw in his own reflection, the look of one with nowhere left to go. Still, Sam Harper had lived too long behind walls to let tenderness show. His voice came out flat, harsh as the land itself. No work here, unless you marry me before sunset. Behind those words lay years of loss, suspicion, and a man who had forgotten how to ask for anything except in the language of survival. Clara Jenkins had reached the end of all things familiar. Her mother's death that spring had left her with nothing but a trunk of clothes too fine for dust roads and debts she could not pay. The boarding house in Roswell had taken her last week's rent and then turned her out, saying a girl alone was nothing but trouble. She'd wandered through town in the heat, offering to scrub floors, to sew, to mind children, but doors closed quickly when they heard her name. Some muttered that her father had been a drunk who died in a brawl, others that her mother had left bills unpaid. In truth, Clara hardly knew which rumors were lies anymore. What mattered was that no one wanted her. So she walked west, carrying a small suitcase and the stubborn will to keep breathing. She sold her mother's brooch for bread. Her shoes wore thin, and her hands grew blistered from the road. Each mile she told herself, somewhere there must be work, somewhere a place to belong. By the time she reached the red mesquite gate, her hope was as worn as her shoes. The house rose above the plain like a fortress, its shutters drawn, the fields stretching wide and lonesome. The man on the porch did not look like someone inclined to kindness. Tall, sun-creased, his revolver hanging as if part of his very frame. Yet she lifted her chin, for pride was all she had left. "I can cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts," she called, clutching the suitcase as if it held her very life. "I'll work for room and board. I'll take half wages if need be." The man did not move. His eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, held hers as the wind pulled dust between them. At last he spoke. "No work here." The words struck like a hammer. Clara's chest tightened. Was this the end then? Turned away into the night with coyotes crying and no other door to knock upon? But before despair could overwhelm her, he spoke again, slowly, as if testing each word. "Unless you marry me before sunset." For a heartbeat, Clara thought she had misheard. She stared, searching his face for mockery, but found only a grim steadiness. "Marry?" she whispered. He nodded once. "That's the only offer I'll make." The strangeness of it nearly broke her resolve. She had imagined sweeping floors, milking cows, even sleeping in the barn if it meant shelter. Marriage was not work. It was life-bound and sealed. To give her name, her future, to a man she had just met? Madness. And yet, was madness worse than the hunger already gnawing her bones? The emptiness waiting on the road behind her? Her thoughts flickered back to her mother's last words, spoken from a bed of fever. "You'll have to be braver than me, Clara. Life don't give second chances." She looked again at the man. His stance was weary, his voice flat, but something in his eyes, something buried deep, did not feel cruel. Hard, yes. Dangerous, perhaps, but not cruel. Clara squared her shoulders. "If I say yes, will I have a roof over me and food on the table?" "You will," he said. "And if I say no?" His gaze drifted past her, to the road disappearing into the rising dusk. "Then the coyotes will sing you to sleep." The bluntness cut her like a knife, yet it carried no malice, only truth. She drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of the decision press down upon her like the desert heat. To step inside that house as a stranger, or to step back onto the road as nothing. Her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. "Then I'll marry you." For the first time, the man's expression shifted. Not quite relief, not quite surprise, but a small loosening of the lines around his mouth, as though some hidden tension had slackened. "Name's Sam Harper," he said, stepping down from the porch. His boots thudded heavy against the wood. "Judge'll still be in town if we ride fast. Best mount up." Clara followed him to the barn, her heart racing. She wanted to ask why he would offer marriage to a stranger, why not hire her as servant instead. But his silence was thick, and she feared breaking it might undo the fragile bargain. The horse he saddled for her was steady and old, its dark mane tangled. He helped her mount without a word, then swung into the saddle himself. Together they rode down the dusty trail, the sun a red coin sinking behind the hills. The town's judge was weary-eyed and half-drunk, but the sight of Sam Harper in his doorway straightened him quick enough. With a few coins pressed into his palm, he opened the book and read the words. Clara's voice shook when she repeated the vows, but Sam's was low and even, like a man reciting a task rather than a promise. It was done in less than half an hour. Papers signed, rings absent, prayers unsaid. When they stepped back into the cooling air, Clara was no longer Clara Jenkins. She was Clara Harper, wife to a man she did not know, bound to a life she could not foresee. As they rode back to the ranch beneath the first stars, Clara glanced sideways at her new husband. His profile was stern, cut against the twilight, his jaw set as though carved from stone. He spoke no word, offered no reassurance. And yet, for the first time in weeks, Clara felt something like safety press against her exhaustion. Perhaps it was foolishness. Perhaps it was the numbness of hunger and grief. But as the wind cooled her flushed cheeks, she whispered to herself, "At least I am not alone anymore." Back at the ranch, the foreman and the cook stood waiting on the porch, their faces etched with suspicion. The cook, a stout Mexican woman named Inez, muttered something under her breath that Clara could not catch. The foreman, an old Texan with a limp, spat into the dust and said, "Another one, Sam?" Clara froze. Another one? Sam's silence deepened. He walked past them without explanation, holding the door open for Clara. She stepped inside, clutching her suitcase, aware of the eyes that followed her every movement. The house smelled of leather, smoke, and loneliness. Its walls were bare, its furnishings plain but solid. No flowers, no curtains, no softness. Clara set her suitcase down gently, as though afraid to disturb the silence. This was her new life, wife in name, stranger in truth. Yet as she looked around, something steadied within her. She had survived the road, hunger, and the cold indifference of neighbors. She would survive this too, and in the corner of her heart, a fragile spark whispered that perhaps survival was not the only thing she might find here. The morning after the hurried marriage, Clara rose before dawn. She had slept lightly on the wide bed that smelled faintly of leather and tobacco. The silence of the house pressed against her chest. Somewhere outside, roosters crowed, and the clatter of hooves marked the men already driving cattle into the gray light. She dressed quickly, smoothed her hair with trembling hands, and stepped into the kitchen. The cook, Inez, was already there, kneading dough with the efficient strength of someone who had done the work for half a lifetime. She looked up, her dark eyes narrowing at the sight of Clara. "You should still be sleeping," Inez said sharply. "I don't need sleep," Clara answered quietly. "I need work." The older woman studied her a moment, then shrugged. "We'll see how long you last." The others didn't stay past a week. Clara's stomach tightened. The others. The foreman's words from last night echoed in her mind. How many wives had there been before her? What had driven them away? She pushed the questions aside. Survival left no room for curiosity. She rolled up her sleeves and reached for a second bowl. They worked in silence until the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Clara set the loaves carefully in the oven, while Inez chopped onions for the morning stew. When the old cook left to fetch water, Clara noticed the ledger left open on the table. Columns of numbers, crude tallies of cattle bought and sold, wages owed, debts collected. The sums were uneven. Someone had miscounted, or perhaps skimmed. Clara frowned, her fingers twitching toward the pencil. Numbers were one thing her mother had taught her well. Before she could touch the book, heavy footsteps sounded on the porch. The foreman entered, hat in hand, his limp more pronounced in the cool morning. He stopped when he saw Clara at the stove. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "You cook too." "I do what needs doing," Clara replied, lifting the loaves from the oven. The crust was golden, the smell rich. She cut one open, steam curling into the air. "Would you like some?" The old man hesitated, then took the slice, chewing slowly. His expression softened. "Better than Inez's. I'll say that much." "I heard that," Inez snapped from the doorway, but her mouth twitched with something like a smile. By mid-morning, Clara had washed clothes, scrubbed floors, and begun setting the accounts to rights. She lost herself in the rhythm of work, and for the first time in weeks, the gnawing edge of despair dulled. Sam appeared near noon. He stood in the doorway, watching as she mended a torn saddle blanket. His presence filled the room, silent and immovable. Clara felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to keep stitching. At last he spoke. "You're not here to be servant," he said. "I'm here to be useful," Clara answered without looking up. A pause. Then, "Useful is good." That was all. He turned and left, his boots thudding across the porch. Yet something in his voice, approval however faint, warmed her. The days that followed were harsh, but Clara endured. She woke before sunrise, worked until her hands bled, then collapsed at night into a sleep so deep she did not dream. Slowly, the walls of suspicion began to shift. Inez started leaving small tasks undone, testing whether Clara would see to them. The foreman, once cold, began to greet her with a nod. Even the vaqueros, young men who had first eyed her with laughter, grew respectful when she rode out with them to mend a fence and managed to keep pace on horseback. But it was the ledger that changed everything. One evening, while Sam sat silent by the hearth, Clara spread the book across the table. She had spent hours tracing the columns, checking figures against receipts stored in a tin box. "These numbers are wrong," she said firmly. "Someone is stealing from you." Sam's head lifted, his eyes narrowed. "Explain." She showed him the sums, the missing coins, the false tallies of feed purchased. Inez, listening from the kitchen, crossed herself. The foreman stiffened. Sam studied the pages, then raised his gaze to Clara. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Not of a servant or stranger, but of someone standing beside him against the weight of the world. "You did this?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "Yes, I can keep the accounts. If you want me to." Sam closed the ledger with a decisive snap. "You will." From that night, her role shifted. She still cooked, scrubbed, and sewed, but she also sat at the table each evening with quill and ink, balancing sums, catching errors, planning purchases. The ranch slowly grew steadier beneath her quiet hand. Yet suspicion lingered. In town, whispers followed Clara's name as they had followed Sam's. Some women pitied her. Others sneered, saying no decent girl would bind herself to a man like Harper unless forced. Men eyed her with curiosity, wondering how long she would last before fleeing like the others. Clara bore it with her chin high. She had lived too long under pity and gossip to let it break her now. One Sunday, as she left the store with flour and soap in her basket, Owen Barton intercepted her. He was broad, well-dressed, his mustache curled with careful vanity. His cattle empire stretched across half the valley, and his smile carried the confidence of a man used to owning what he desired. "Mrs. Harper," he said smoothly, touching his hat. "A pleasure to see you in town. I must say, you carry yourself better than your predecessors." Clara's blood chilled. Predecessors? Barton leaned closer, his voice low. "Oh, didn't Sam tell you? You're not the first bride to step into Red Mesquite. The others left when they learned the truth." "What truth?" she asked, though dread coiled in her stomach. "That Sam Harper hides stolen gold in his land," Barton whispered. "That he consorts with outlaws and tribes. A dangerous man to tie your name to, don't you think?" Clara gripped the basket tighter. She wanted to turn and leave, but Barton's hand brushed her sleeve, holding her still. "If you ever need protection," he murmured, "my door is always open." Her voice came sharp, stronger than she felt. "Remove your hand." Barton chuckled but obeyed, bowing with mock courtesy. "Think on what I've said. You're a clever woman. You deserve better than a man with blood on his boots." Clara hurried away, her heart hammering. Barton's words gnawed at her all the way back to the ranch. She wanted to ask Sam to demand truth, but when she saw him mending a fence at dusk, the sweat streaking his face, the silence heavy around him, her voice faltered. Not yet. Instead, she worked harder. She baked bread that filled the house with warmth, mended shirts until the foreman muttered his thanks, and kept the books so precise even Sam's stern gaze softened when he looked over them. One evening, as the sky flamed red beyond the mesquite trees, Clara stood at the porch railing, her hands dusted with flour. Sam joined her, leaning on the post. For a long time they watched the horizon together. Then he said, almost reluctantly, "You've done more for this place in a month than I have in years." Clara turned, startled. His profile was hard, but his eyes were not. She searched for words, found only honesty. "I only wanted a place to belong," she whispered. His gaze lingered on her, heavy with something unspoken. Then he looked away, jaw tightening. Inside the house, the old clock ticked steadily. Outside, the coyotes called. Between the two, silence stretched. But it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people standing on the edge of something fragile, uncertain, and real. For the first time, Sam Harper saw Clara not as a shield, not as a servant, but as someone who might carry the burden with him. And for the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe that her life at Red Mesquite could be more than survival, could be home. Summer ripened into its fiercest heat. By July, the Rio Hondo ran shallow between banks of cracked clay, and grass grew brittle beneath the hooves of Sam Harper's cattle. Clara rose each day to the steady rhythm of ranch life. Bread baked before dawn, ledgers balanced by noon, accounts checked against deliveries. She had begun to carry herself differently, no longer a guest in another's house but a woman who belonged to it. Sam noticed. He never said so aloud, but there were moments. The way his eyes softened when she spread supper on the table, the way his hand lingered an instant when passing her a tool, that betrayed it. But where peace took root within Red Mesquite, threats gathered beyond its fences. Owen Barton had long coveted Harper's land. The wide stretch along the creek was the last parcel keeping his cattle empire from swallowing the valley whole. He could not seize it by law. Sam's deed was ironclad, but rumor and pressure were weapons as sharp as any blade. One afternoon, as Clara left the mercantile, Barton appeared again, his smile too polished to be friendly. "Mrs. Harper," he said smoothly, tipping his hat. Still playing house on that cursed ranch? Clara kept walking, basket in hand. I have no time for your words, Mr. Barton. But Barton matched her step, lowering his voice. The other women left when they learned Sam's secrets. You should too. Better to leave by choice than be driven out by fire. Clara stopped. Fire! Barton's smile widened. The land out there burns quick, ma'am. A single torch in the wrong hands, and all that work of yours goes to ash. Her heart jolted. Are you threatening me? Not at all. His voice was silk, but his eyes gleamed like flint. I'm warning you. A wise woman knows when to cut her losses. He touched his hat again and strolled away, leaving Clara trembling in the dust. That evening she told Sam. He listened without interruption, his face carved in shadow by the lamp. When she finished, his silence was heavier than words. You believe him capable of it? Clara asked. Sam's gaze lifted, cold and certain. Barton's capable of worse. Then we must tell the sheriff. The sheriff owes Barton favors. Talking won't stop a torch at midnight. Clara's throat tightened. Then what will? Sam set his jaw. We'll build. We'll fight. They began raising a cabin on the disputed claim, a stretch of creekside where Sam meant to prove his right by building permanent shelter. Clara helped mark beams, hauled water, even steadied posts with blistered hands. The men of the ranch worked harder than ever, spurred on by Sam's rare intensity. But Barton was watching. One night, Clara awoke to the smell of smoke. She rushed to the window and saw flames leaping against the horizon. The half-built cabin was burning. She cried out, and Sam was already saddling his horse. They rode hard through the dark. The cabin roared with fire, sparks twisting upward like angry spirits. Around it, shadows moved, Barton's men, laughing as the flames ate the timbers. Sam reined his horse hard. Stay back, he barked at Clara, then spurred forward, revolver drawn. The men scattered, but two raised rifles. Clara's scream caught in her throat, until another sound cut the night. A wild cry, fierce and ululating, rose from the ridge. From the darkness rode figures daubed in paint, their horses swift as shadows. Arrows hissed through the smoke. Barton's men shouted in panic, one dropping his torch as he fled. Clara clutched her saddle horn, eyes wide. Apaches, she whispered. Sam lowered his gun but did not fire. He sat motionless as the warriors circled the burning cabin, driving Barton's men into the desert night. One of the riders, a tall figure with feathers woven into his braids, paused long enough to meet Sam's gaze. No words passed, but recognition flashed between them. The Apaches vanished into the darkness as swiftly as they had come, leaving only the crackle of fire and the stench of smoke. Clara turned to Sam, her voice shaking. Why would they help us? Sam dismounted slowly, eyes on the ridge where the riders had disappeared. Years back, I pulled their chief from a flood, saved his life. Seems he hasn't forgotten. Clara's heart pounded. Then we owe them our thanks. Sam shook his head. We owe them our silence. Folks in town wouldn't understand. By morning, the cabin was a blackened shell. Clara knelt among the ashes, her hands streaked with soot, her throat raw from smoke. Sam stood beside her, fists clenched. They'll come again, she whispered. They will, he said. Then what hope do we have? Sam looked at her, his expression hard but steady. The kind that builds again after fire. The kind that doesn't bend to men like Barton. Clara rose slowly, brushing ash from her dress. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she saw not only a man hardened by grief, but one willing to stand beside her against the storm. Barton was furious. The fire should have driven Harper from the land. Yet the very next week, Sam and Clara began raising fresh timbers. Word spread quickly. Harper was defiant, his new wife at his side. Unable to seize the land openly, Barton turned to subtler tools. He spread rumors, Sam consorting with outlaws, hiding stolen payroll gold, trafficking rifles to Apaches. Clara heard whispers each time she entered town, saw the sidelong glances, felt the chill in the preacher's greeting. One evening, a ranch hand rode in with news. Barton had gathered men in town, armed and restless. Clara's stomach knotted. What will they do? Whatever Barton tells them, Sam said grimly. That night, as they sat at the kitchen table, Clara placed her hand over Sam's for the first time. His rough knuckles twitched beneath her touch but did not pull away. We can't stand alone, she said. If Barton comes, we need allies. Sam's eyes darkened. Neighbors won't risk his wrath. Then we ask the sheriff, or the Apaches, or anyone who'll listen. You saved their chief once, they saved us in return. Perhaps they'll do it again. Sam stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe. Days later, while repairing the corral, Clara saw movement on the ridge. A small group of Apache riders approached, moving with deliberate calm. Sam stepped forward, hand lifted in greeting. The leader dismounted, his face painted with streaks of red. He spoke briefly, his voice low and steady. When he left, Sam returned to Clara, his expression unreadable. They say Barton has spoken to men who will do worse than burn cabins. Outlaws, killers. They'll strike soon. Clara's breath caught. And the Apaches? They won't fight our war, Sam said. But they'll bear witness. If Barton comes with fire again, they'll see it and tell it true. Clara nodded slowly. It was not rescue, but it was something. Truth, when spoken by those outside Barton's reach, might yet save them. That night, as coyotes howled beyond the fence line, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. She thought of her mother's words. Life don't give second chances. Perhaps this was her second chance after all. Not just to survive, but to stand for something greater than herself. She turned her head. Sam slept beside her, one hand resting near the revolver on the nightstand. Even in sleep, he was a man braced for battle. Yet she no longer saw him as a stranger wrapped in silence. He was her husband, bound not by paper alone but by the fire they had faced together. And as the wind carried the scent of ash through the open window, Clara whispered into the dark. We'll not let him take this from us. Not Barton, not anyone. Her words dissolved into the night, carried across the plain like a vow. Barton's men had failed with fire. Now Barton would choose dirtier tricks. He had wealth, power, and the kind of cunning that clothed violence in the garments of law. Clara knew he would not stop. But she also knew something else, something Barton had not reckoned with. Sam Harper no longer stood alone. And neither did she. The tension in Lincoln County thickened like storm clouds. Barton had failed with fire, and whispers spread that he would strike again. This time not with torches but with accusations sharp enough to cut a man's name to ribbons. In the saloon, Barton's voice carried. Sam Harper's no rancher. He's a thief, a killer, a traitor who deals with savages. Ask yourselves, how many wives has he run off? How many graves lie unmarked on his land? His words slithered through town, sowing suspicion like tares in a wheat field. By autumn, Barton's plan was plain. If he could not seize Harper's land by brute force, he would poison him with rumor until lawmen came with shackles. Sam knew it, Clara knew it, and the weight of it pressed hard on both. One evening, Clara found Sam sitting on the porch, sharpening his knife though no cattle needed cutting. His face was drawn tight, the way it had been the first day she met him. They'll come soon, he said without looking at her. Not just Barton's men. The sheriff, maybe soldiers. He's bought them all. Clara sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. Then we need more than guns. His eyes flicked toward her. And what do you suggest? Prayer? Truth, Clara answered. Barton lies. But if we can show his hand, catch him in the act, then even the sheriff can't turn away. Sam's mouth pressed tight. He distrusted hope, yet her words struck something in him. What are you thinking? He asked. Clara took a breath. Barton's certain he can burn us out again. Let him try. Let him come at night with his men. We'll have the sheriff here, hidden. And the Apaches too, witnesses who owe you a debt. When Barton strikes, he'll condemn himself. Sam stared at her as if seeing her anew. Then slowly he nodded. A trap, then. The plan was laid with quiet care. Clara rode to town, speaking softly to Sheriff Gaines, a man worn by too many years of compromise. She reminded him of his duty, of the oath he'd sworn. Perhaps it was her calm voice, or perhaps his own conscience stirred, but the sheriff agreed. He would come, though his trust was wary. Sam met with the Apaches at the ridge. Their chief listened in silence, then said, "We do not fight your wars, but we will see. Truth matters." And so it was agreed. 2 nights later, the cabin stood rebuilt, its timbers stark against the starlit sky. Sam and Clara lingered within, a single lamp burning low. Outside, hidden in the brush, the sheriff and his deputies waited. Further back, silent as shadows, the Apaches watched. The night deepened. An owl called once. Then silence thickened until Clara's breath sounded loud in her own ears. She reached for Sam's hand beneath the table. His grip was steady, strong. Then came the sound they had been waiting for, hoofbeats, muffled but urgent. Voices whispered. Then the flare of a torch lit the darkness. Barton's men. They crept toward the cabin, shadows bending with the fire. Barton himself rode at their head, his teeth flashing in the glow. "Tonight it ends," he muttered. Sam rose, ready. Clara held fast to his hand. "Wait," she whispered. "Let them hang themselves." Through the window they saw Barton's men strike the torch against the cabin wall. The flame licked dry wood, hungry. Clara's heart pounded. But before the fire could take, a voice rang out. "Hold it right there." Sheriff Gaines stepped from the brush, revolver raised. Behind him, his deputies spread out, rifles aimed. And from the ridge, the Apaches appeared, silent, unyielding, their presence undeniable. Barton froze. For a moment his mask slipped, and the smug confidence drained from his face. But he recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "Sheriff, you think this proves anything? We were out riding, saw smoke, came to help." The sheriff's voice was cold. "Then why's the torch in your hand, Barton?" Murmurs rippled among his men. One dropped his torch outright. Another shifted uneasily, glancing toward the Apaches whose eyes gleamed in the starlight. Clara stepped forward, her voice clear. "You said you'd drive us out by fire, Barton. You threatened me yourself." The sheriff looked hard at Barton. "Is that true?" Barton sneered. "You going to take the word of a desperate woman? Of Apaches?" But just then, the Apache chief raised his hand. In halting English he spoke. "We saw, we heard. Harper's cabin, Barton's torch. This is truth." The weight of his words fell heavy. No man in the valley could dismiss such a witness. The sheriff's deputies shifted, and even Barton's own riders seemed shaken. Barton's fury boiled over. He snatched for his pistol, shouting, "Then I'll settle this myself." But Sam was faster. His revolver cleared leather in a flash, trained steady on Barton's chest. The air tightened, every breath caught between life and death. For a moment Clara feared blood would spill. But Sam's voice was low, calm, carrying more weight than a shout. "You've stolen, lied, burned, and now you'll answer for it. No more blood, no more fire. This ends tonight with truth." Barton's eyes flickered. He saw the rifles leveled at him, the Apaches watching, the sheriff grim and steady. His bravado faltered. Slowly, with a curse, he let the pistol fall into the dust. The sheriff stepped forward, iron in his voice. "Owen Barton, you're under arrest. And this time, no wealth nor whispers will buy you free." As Barton was led away, Clara stood beside Sam, her hand slipping into his. The night air was sharp with smoke, but also with something new, relief. She turned to him, her voice soft but certain. "This isn't just your land, Sam. It's my home now, too." For the first time since she had met him, his face eased. The hardness in his eyes softened, and though he said nothing, she felt his answer in the way his hand closed around hers. Firm, steady, unbreakable. The trap had sprung, not with bloodshed but with witnesses, truth, and courage. Barton's threats had crumbled, and in their place stood something stronger than fear, the quiet certainty of belonging. The first light of dawn broke across the horizon, painting the battlefield in muted shades of gray and gold. Smoke still clung to the valley like a wounded beast refusing to die, curling around the bodies of soldiers who would never rise again. Tobias Redmont stood on the porch of what remained of his cabin, rifle hanging loosely at his side. His hands were raw from blood and splinters, his shoulders aching from a night that had stretched into forever. The Apache women moved among the fallen with silent efficiency, checking for survivors, reclaiming weapons, and tending to their own wounded. They did not celebrate. Survival was not victory, it was merely the postponement of another fight. Tobias recognized that same truth in himself. Ayanna approached him, her face streaked with soot, hair damp from mist, but her eyes carried a steel that had not diminished even through the horrors of the night. In her arms she carried the baby, miraculously unharmed despite the storm of violence that had swept over them. The child's quiet breathing seemed louder than the groans of dying men around them. "You kept your word," she said simply. Tobias gave a hollow laugh. "Not sure what word that was. I've broken so many in my life." Ayanna studied him for a long moment. "The word to stand." The rancher had no reply. He had not thought of it as courage, only necessity. Yet in that necessity something inside him had shifted. Beyond the ridge, the reinforcements had scattered when they realized the ambush was turning against them. Some fled into the hills. Others lay dead in the mud. The dam still stood, the dynamite unused, the land unbroken. Tobias had chosen mercy over destruction, but mercy carried its own costs. Now those who had survived would return with stories. The army would not forgive. The name Tobias Redmont would carry across territories, branded as outlaw and traitor. He turned toward the valley where the sun now revealed the scope of the carnage. "They'll be back," he said, "next time with more men, more guns, and orders to burn everything in their path." Ayanna shifted the baby in her arms and nodded. "That is why we cannot stay. My people wait for me. The council must hear what happened here. The truth about Morrison, about the soldiers who hunt us." Tobias frowned. "You think they'll believe you? A council may be wise, but the world beyond it listens only to the voice of power. Morrison's death will be painted as murder, this battle as rebellion. You'll be the villain of their story." "Then I will be the villain," Ayanna replied without hesitation. "Better a villain who speaks truth than a victim who dies silent." Tobias looked at her, this woman who had appeared at his door as a refugee and revealed herself to be something far more dangerous, a leader who would not bow to lies. He wondered if she saw the same in him, that the hermit who had hidden from the world for 8 years was gone, replaced by a man who had chosen to fight again. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. Tobias reached out instinctively, surprising himself. Ayanna placed the child carefully into his arms. For a long moment, he held the infant as if afraid it might vanish like a dream. He thought of Sarah, of the daughter he'd lost. His throat tightened. "This one will grow up knowing what was done here," Ayanna said. "Knowing that when the world turned dark, there were still those who lit a fire." Tobias handed the child back with trembling hands. He could not trust his voice. Behind them, the other women had begun dismantling what was left of his defenses, gathering supplies, preparing to move before scouts returned. Tobias realized he had a choice: remain and await certain retribution, or follow them into uncertainty. Ayanna saw the conflict in his face. "Your land will not forgive you. Your neighbors will not forgive you. Only the road ahead holds a future. Walk it with us." For years, Tobias had believed his future ended the day he buried his family. That life after grief was only survival, not living. But standing here, amid the ashes of his past, he felt the faint stirrings of something else. Purpose. The crunch of boots on gravel interrupted his thoughts. One of the women returned from scouting the ridge. "Riders," she reported. 2, maybe 3. Too far to tell who. Ayanna's expression hardened. "Soldiers." The woman shook her head. "Not in uniform, but armed." Tobias slung his rifle. His decision was made for him. Whether soldier or outlaw, anyone riding this way would mean danger. His ranch was no longer a refuge, it was a beacon. "They'll keep coming," he muttered. "As long as this place stands, it will draw them. Then let it stand no more." He walked back into the cabin one final time. Inside, he gathered the charges he had once prepared for the dam. But now he laid them carefully along the wooden beams of his home. This house had been his prison, his grave. Better to burn it himself than watch enemies claim it. When he returned outside, Ayana's eyes softened with understanding. "You're ready." Tobias struck the match without ceremony. Flames caught quickly, racing through dry wood and memories alike. He did not look back as the cabin became a pyre. Instead, he walked toward the waiting horses with Ayana and the others, leaving the past behind in smoke and ash. The riders approaching from the ridge slowed at the sight of fire rising into the sky. Whether friend or foe, they would arrive too late. Tobias Redmont was no longer a man bound to land and grief. He was a man walking into war, and for the first time in 8 years he felt alive.